As teams are approaching that 50-game mark, we've seen players fall well short of expectations, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is every team's most disappointing player in the year 2025 thus far. For the Cleveland Guardians, we're actually not going to go with the obvious pick of Emmanuel Clase, who starting the year did look appalling. He was terrible, but in the month of May, he's actually turned things around pretty nicely. So instead, I'm going to go with John Kinsey Noel, who this year has just been downright unplayable. Up to this point, has a 150 batting average, a 179 on base, a 250 slugging, only has 2 homers on the year. This was a guy you were expecting to take that next step forward, be a guy that's just pounding the baseball anytime he steps up to the plate, and he just hasn't been that this year. For the Detroit Tigers, it was tough to find a guy that was like overwhelmingly disappointing up to this point in the year. I went with Jackson Jobe just because the expectation was that he was going to come into the major league and succeed. And so far, he's kind of getting mediocre results. He has a 4.12 ERA, 5.12 FIP, 4.87 xFIP, but he's only striking out 18% of the batters. And I think that's where I really key in on. You expect him to be a strikeout artist, especially with the stuff and spin rates that he has. Walk rate might always be a little bit high, but he's giving up home runs as well. ERA, again, still fine. Am I that worried? No. But if I have to pick somebody, it's probably Job. For the Pittsburgh Pirates, it's hard not to say the front office or general manager or somebody like that. But if I have to pick a player, it's probably Brian Reynolds. Over the last few years, he's been the one consistent factor that you can count on within this team to succeed. And so far this year, he has just not been it at the plate. A 203 average, 269 on base, a 330 slugging, only 6 homers on the year as well. He just really hasn't been that same player. He's kind of looked lost at the plate as of, late April, early May. He's just not been the same player at all. For the Seattle Mariners, it has to be Bryce Miller, who prior to injury only had made 8 starts, but he had a 5.22 ERA and a 3.97 FIP, 4.63 xFIP, was only striking out 20% of the batters he faced while walking 12.1. Just really uncharacteristic stuff for Bryce Miller, who's just been a stud for this team up to this point in his career. He did have a pretty high BABIP, all things considered, but still some concerning signs. Hopefully, he can come back from injury ready to go. For the Los Angeles Dodgers, it kind of has to be Roki Sasaki, unfortunately, because coming into the year, he was the number one prospect. If you had been following his time through Japan, you knew he was probably not as high of a prospect as he was following the World Baseball Classic in 2023. But in his 8 starts in 2025, he had a 4.72 ERA, 6.15 FIP, 5.69 xFIP. He's only striking out 15% of the batters he faces while walking over 14%. He's also allowing a ton of home runs as well. He just really hasn't been the pitcher that we've come to expect from a guy like Roki Sasaki making his way over. There just isn't a lot great happening with him right now, especially for a guy with such high prospect status. Another top prospect that really hasn't hit the ground running is Dylan Cruz, who up to this point in the year has a 191 batting average, a 257 on base, 331 slugging, only has 6 homers and 11 stolen bases, but is also striking out nearly 30% of the time. He just really hasn't been that promised prospect that we once expected. And it's just been really disappointing up to this point in the year. For the San Diego Padres, it's a tough team to find the player that's really falling short of expectations. Even the marginal players are performing pretty well up to this point in the year. So I had to give it to Dylan Cease, who, despite having a 4.6 ERA, does have some pretty good underlying numbers: 3.22 FIP, 3.5 xFIP, striking out nearly 30% of the batters he faces, walking under 9%, keeping the home runs down for the most part. He just pretty much has a high BABIP. There's not really much to say other than that. Just kind of getting a little unlucky, giving up a few more hits than you would probably expect. For the Baltimore Orioles, there's a long list of people that should be on this list: ownership, general management, and then we can get into the players. I think you have to be between Adley Rutschman or Tyler O'Neill. For me, it has to be Tyler O'Neill because he was brought in as one of the few free agents that they actually did bring in. He was expected to make a difference within this lineup, and so far, he's not been doing that. 24 games played, has a 188 batting average, a 280 on base, 325 slugging, giving him a 605 OPS and a 76 OPS plus. Only has 2 homers and 10 RBIs on the year. He just hasn't been the player that he was last year, where he was able to accumulate 2.6 BWAR in 113 games. Looked incredible, hit 31 homers in that time. He just hasn't been that player. He hasn't been the kickstart to this team, and This team looks dead in the water, and with people like Tyler O'Neill not producing, it just makes it look even worse. For the Chicago White Sox, it has to be Andrew Vaughn, who just refuses to show the potential that he once had. A 184 batting average, 214 on base, 316 slugging, giving him a 45 WRC plus, 3.8% walk rate, 23% strikeout rate, and a negative 1.2 F4 on the season. Yeah, he's not been that great. For the Los Angeles Angels, it's another team that you could pretty much pick a load of players and probably be right. Travis d'Arnaud has not been the guy that we expected coming into this team, albeit in a small sample. Jorge Soler's just kind of been an average level bat. You didn't trade for him to be that. Joe Adele still refuses to break out, has a negative .04 WAR on the season, but I gave it to Luis Rengifo because up to this point he has a 52 WRC plus, 218 batting average, 258 on base, 289 slugging, one homer, one stolen base. Not been great up to this point in the year, and he's not playing good defense either, so he's just all around been a negative for this team. For the Boston Red Sox, if Tristan Casas hadn't gone down with injury, it would probably be him, but I had to give it to Tanner Houck, who up to this point in the year, he's made 9 starts and has an 8.04 ERA. This is a guy that was an all-star last year, and now he has a negative .04 F4, a 6.11 FIP, 4.59 XFIP. He does have an extremely high BABIP, but he's just not really getting strikeouts. He's walking a decent amount of batters. There's just not a lot to like about what's going on. For the Milwaukee Brewers, it pretty much has to be Christian Yelich if you go based off name value. Up to this point in the year, he has a sub 200 batting average, 295 on base, 349 slugging, giving him an 81 WRC plus. Defensively, we know he's atrocious. He's still striking out nearly 30% of the time, walking over 11%. The Atlanta Braves as a whole have been trending in the right direction ever since that horrid start to the year, but they still have a few players that haven't turned the corner yet, and the biggest name has to be Ozzy Albies, who still is yet to find his footing. A 225 average, 284 on base, 332 slugging, giving him a 72 WRC plus. Just hasn't really been that great this year. But on top of that, you haven't seen good production from Michael Harris or Razel Iglesias, so there are a few options here, but I think name value wise, it has to be Ozzy Albies. For the Texas Rangers, it's actually kind of been weird. The media's been harping on Jake Berger, Jock Peterson, but truly the biggest letdown of this team this year has to be Marcus Semien, who up to this point in the year has a 174 batting average, 267 on base, 234 slugging, giving him a 48 WRC plus. Defense has been solid, base running's been fine, but only 3 homers and 2 stolen bases on the year is not good, and especially not for a top caliber second baseman like Marcus Semien. For the Tampa Bay Rays, I gave it to Edwin Uceta, who last year walked on water, but this year he's looking a lot more human. Up to this point has a 5.3 ERA, 5.98 FIP, 5.14 XFIP, negative .05 F4 on the season, not getting the strikeouts, walking a fair amount of batters, also allowing a good amount of home runs. He just hasn't looked like the same reliever that he was last year. Shane Baz is another good shout, but he just has a little bit better peripherals. For the Giants, I think there's 2 very clear options. You have Jordan Hicks, who just got kicked out of the rotation, and Lamonte Wade Jr. To me, Lamonte Wade Jr.'s season has been more despicable than Jordan Hicks because Jordan Hicks' peripherals at least look decent. Lamonte Wade Jr. has been downright unplayable. A 165 batting average, 266 on base, 281 slugging, a 56 WRC plus. Obviously doesn't play great fielding, isn't a good hitter up to this point in the year. He just doesn't have very much value as he is currently playing. For the St. Louis Cardinals, it has to be Jordan Walker for the second straight season, not showing that top prospect form that we once knew and wanted to see. A 189 batting average, 255 on base, 273 slugging, giving him a 51 WRC plus, negative .06 F4 on the season, striking out 30% of the time, walking under 7%. There's just not much to like about his game at this point in the year. He just doesn't do a lot of things well, and if he's not hitting, that defense certainly isn't going to carry him either. In Arizona, the most disappointing player up to this point in the year has been Yordan Alvarez, who we've all become to love, of this great hitting left-hander who just has one of the sweetest swings, smacks the ball every single time, and he just hasn't done that this year. I know he's hurt as of right now, but up to that point, he only had a 210 batting average, 306 on base, 340 slugging, 79 WRC plus, only had 3 home runs on the year, was Still not striking out a lot, still getting his fair share of walks, but just wasn't putting the ball in play and wasn't hitting it like the way we have come to know. For the Athletics, it really felt like Lawrence Butler turned a corner in the second half of last season, turning into an absolute superstar. And this year, it feels like he's taken a step backwards. Up to this point, only has a 227 batting average, 292 on base, 386 slug, 6 homers, 6 stolen bases, still showing flashes of that brilliance, but just really hasn't put it all together like we saw last season. For the Chicago Cubs, I went with Ryan Presley, who was supposed to come in and stabilize this bullpen a bit in the later portions, but really hasn't done that so far this year. A 6.06 ERA, 474 FIP, 528 xFIP, really isn't striking out batters either, walking an absurd amount as well. He has been keeping the ball in the yard, but if you're allowing that many people on base without getting strikeouts, it's bound to happen eventually where you get a high ERA. For the Miami Marlins, I had to go with Sandy Alcantara, who coming into the year was probably the biggest trade chip known on the market, but he's really been lessening his value as the season goes on. Up to this point in the year, he's made 9 starts, has a 7.99 ERA, 5.37 FIP, 4.61 xFIP. He's not keeping the ball in the yard, he's not striking batters out, and he's walking a fair share of batters as well. So it's really tough to see much value in the way he's pitching. Yes, he's coming off a major injury, so you always have to take that into account. But up to this point in the year, he's not been very good. In Cincinnati, I would say they have like a big three that have been kind of disappointing up to this point in the year. I went with Brady Singer because he's the piece they went out and acquired. They went and made sure they got this guy to stabilize this rotation, which all things considered has been really good, but he's been the weak point so far this year, and that is Brady Singer because he has a 5.01 ERA up to this point in the year. FIP, XFIP, they're a little bit more kind to him, but he hasn't been keeping the ball in the yard. He's not striking a ton of batters out either. He's just kind of had some flaws up to this point in the year that have blossomed a large ERA. Some other names would be Spencer Steer, Matt McLean. They really haven't got their traction going on the offensive side either. For the Philadelphia Phillies, we have to talk about Aaron Nola, who just hit the injured list. But before that, he was not pitching good. Made 9 starts, has a 6.16 ERA, 5.02 FIP, 3.57 xFIP. He's been getting taken yard a lot, and he's not really getting strikeouts, still keeping the walks down, but not doing the key fundamental things of being a good pitcher with a good ERA. Luckily, this rotation has found some nice pieces to kind of band-aid that big hole that they would be otherwise missing. For the Arizona Diamondbacks, I went with Zach Gallen, who through 10 starts has a 5.14 ERA and has really not looked like the same pitcher at all. He has a 4.7 FIP, a 1.375 WHIP. He's not getting the home runs to stay in the yard. A 1.6 home run per 9 inning up to this point in the year. Otherwise, his stats look pretty much the same, maybe giving up a few more hits, but the home runs have really snake bit him so far this year. For the New York Yankees, I think it's a pretty obvious one. Devin Williams has not been good, not been the same player that we expected coming into New York. Obviously, that ERA is probably going to balloon a little bit whenever you go to New York, but so far this year, he's been a 7.31 ERA type pitcher, 303 FIP, but the xFIP doesn't love him either with a 4.47. This is not the airbender. This is not the guy that we knew was going to come in and just shut down games. He just hasn't been that. He's walking an absurd amount of batters, still getting a good amount of strikeouts, but he's just not been the same guy. The BABIP is unbelievably high, but he still hasn't been that great. Even if you can lower that number, expect the numbers to come down, he's still way above where he was previously in his career. For the Kansas City Royals, we have to talk about Salvador Perez, who up to this point in the year has not been the same player. He has a 223 batting average, 259 on base, 331 slug, 61 WRC plus, only has 2 homers on the year alongside that. He's not walking. He just really isn't doing a lot of good at the plate. Now, the expected numbers do still expect him to bounce back and be a lot better than what he has been, but up to this point, he's been pretty disappointing. For the Minnesota Twins, we have to talk about Carlos Correa, who, if not for his defense, would be really down in the dumps, especially in the WAR department. But up to this point in the year, he's just not hitting. Has a 236 average, 274 on base, 331 slugging, only 2 homers, and a 71 WRC plus. Plus, he just had that collision with Byron Buxton that sent him to the IL for concussion. Not a lot's going right for Carlos Correa this year in Minnesota. Hopefully, whenever he gets back, he can get healthy and produce like we know Carlos Correa should be. For the Colorado Rockies, it has to be Herman Marquez, who up to this point in the year is nearly allowing a run per every inning he pitches, 8.78 earned run average in 9 innings. He's allowed 39 earned runs across his 40 innings pitched. FIP likes him a little bit better, 4.84, but he's just not looked like the same player at all. Strikeouts are non existent, only 4.7 per 9 innings, 3.6 walks per 9 innings, giving up a ton of hits. Injuries really look like they've taken it out of this player, and it sucks for the Rockies because this was probably one of your biggest trade chips for this deadline. For the Toronto Blue Jays, I think you could pick either of their offseason additions, whether that be Anthony Santander or Jeff Hoffman. I went with Santander because he's been near unplayable at the plate. 182 batting average, 264 on base, 308 slugging, a 64 WRC plus, good for 5 homers. Not good. We all know he's not a great defender either. Base running, not that great. Negative point .7 WAR on the season. He's just not good, and that contract is not looking good for the Blue Jays. For the New York Mets, I think we have to talk about Mark Vientos, who had a breakout season last year. 3.1 WAR, 27 homers, 71 RBIs, an 837 OPS, a 135 OPS plus. This year, it's not looked the same. A 97 OPS plus, 689 OPS, only has 5 homers on the year. He just hasn't looked like the same ball player up to this point in the year. And that's going to do it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know who you think will bounce back from their pretty horrid start up to this point in the year. Again, thank you guys so much for watching and have a wonderful day.